Hi, I'm Marla, and this is my Cakefail story. I graduated from engineering school in Massachusetts and law school in Ohio, after which I worked as an attorney in New York and North Carolina. I've also managed legal departments in California, Japan, and Germany, and spent a few decades working for Swiss companies. Mostly I've lived and worked in New Jersey, coincidentally not far from Carolyn of Carolyn's Cakes, along with my husband and our adopted rescue dog. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, where my 95-year-old parents still live, and I have one sister who normally lives in Savannah, Georgia, with her husband. Since my folks need help, my sister and brother-in-law have temporarily relocated to Denver, and they brought their various pets with them, including their very large tortoise named Torte. She likes to be petted. I visit Denver often to give my sister a break. I recently retired during the great COVID retirement boom. So having found myself with free time, in April I researched organizations looking for volunteers and stumbled upon my local chapter of For Goodness Cakes, a group that recruits volunteers to make birthday cakes for kids who might not otherwise get one. Now I remember half a century ago how much I wanted a Snoopy cake on my birthday, so I thought, count me in. Making cakes seemed like a great way to channel my creativity urges. The problem is, I have a number of flaws that might make me ill-suited to the task. Now that last one's just mean. And even worse, my experience of making and decorating cakes is nowhere near the level needed to be a member of the Sprinkle Squad, which is what For Goodness Cakes calls their volunteer cake bakers. But I'll give it a try. So to hone my skills, I decided to first watch YouTube videos and make some test cakes for family and friends. Here are my 6 projects since then. My vision was to make a Mother's Day cake and mail it to my mom in Denver. I'd create our family tree on the top of a round 8-inch cake. So my folks, my sister and I, our husbands, and pets, along with my 3 nephews, their girlfriends, and their dogs, each represented by human and animal faces that I'd make using purchased fondant and silicone molds. This was all before I had found any of Carolyn's Cakes videos. To complete the theme, I put a picturesque forest on the cake sides with a lovely leaf canopy hanging above the forest, all accomplished through stenciling buttercream frosting onto a buttercream frosted cake with an assortment of stencils I purchased. I'd use another stencil as well to put Happy Mother's Day on the front. I found that stenciling buttercream on buttercream didn't really work. My stencils were washed out and looked nothing like the videos I had watched. Look at that pathetic lettering. My lovely leaf canopy more resembles radioactive nuclear fallout. The background trees were so faint that I just started glopping on foreground trees with blobs of icing. The family tree on top came out pretty creepy, and that pre-made fondant didn't taste very good either. Plus, the whole cake was way too sweet for everyone's taste. But at least the shapes were a hit with my mom.
And look at that. Isn't that adorable?
Well, that's the kind of thing moms say. And I also learned lots about shipping cakes across country in dry ice. I was determined to nail down the stenciling issues, and I hoped to achieve the lovely night sky effect demonstrated in this Evil Cake Genius video. So I bought an airbrush machine and the necessary stencils from Evil Cake Genius and got to work. I decided to use a blueberry cobbler cake recipe from Cake by Courtney, and she even has this helpful video on how to fill the cake using a dam of buttercream icing to hold in the blueberry compote filling. I didn't adequately create the stiff dam of buttercream around the blueberry filling, so the layer edges oozed out and streamed down the side of my crumb coat. I could only stop the deluge with a horrid bulging ring of buttercream around the layer edges, and then I started the process of airbrushing. At first it was fine, beautiful, blue and violet sky colors getting darker the farther up the cake. But once I was done, I realized the colors were turning into drips, and dripping, and dripping, no matter what I did, putting it in the fridge, putting it in the freezer, dabbing it with paper towels. The drips kept on dripping for at least 48 hours, making a horrible mess. So bad, forget about stenciling anything. But it was a good recipe and hubby was happy to eat it anyway, not a total loss. At this point, I discovered Carolyn's cakes and started watching her videos like a fiend. Carolyn is a professional cake maker. Look at these beautiful cakes she's made. And she gives all sorts of helpful advice on her YouTube channel, from recipes to decorating tips. Carolyn's videos convinced me that the way to decorating success was to not merely frost the cake with buttercream icing, but to also then cover the cake with marshmallow fondant. Her recipe, not the bad-tasting fondant you buy, and stencil or airbrush on the fondant, not the buttercream. So I decided from then on, I'd use Carolyn's recipes, and I'd learn to decorate with fondant on my cake. My wonderful former boss was retiring himself, so I volunteered to make his retirement celebration cake. I was not taking any chances, so I used Carolyn's recipes in abundance. I knew my ex-boss was going on an African safari right after retiring. He also loves fishing in his boat and taking ocean cruises. So on the sides of the cake, I wanted a safari scene and a body of water with a fishing boat and cruise liner. Both the water scene and the safari background would be stenciled on the fondant I would cover my cake with, as Carolyn recommended, as would be the writing on the top of the cake. I'd add some 3D safari figures from molds, and I'd make a cake topper in the shape of our company logo, but with my ex-boss's name. I didn't yet trust myself to make the logo properly, so I found a cake supply store that would print me an edible image that I intended to put on fondant. While there, I figured I'd pick up a few fondant tools and accessories. When I asked where they were, "Do you have Tylus powder?"
What is that?
You know, for fondant.
Fondant? Oh dear, it's sacrilege. I've never heard of anything so absurd. Here at Shopkeep Supplies, we only...
The store owner disparaged the whole idea of fondant. He was so insistent that I should only use buttercream frosting and chocolate that I was shamed out of covering the cake in fondant. Only fondant I used was for the topper sign. I used chocolate for the figures on the side of the cake, and even though Carolyn doesn't seem to like stenciling buttercream on buttercream, she does have a video demonstrating how to do it, so I hope to get better results this time. The stenciling was still a disaster anywhere I tried. Even though the letters on the top of the cake came from a stencil, they stenciled so poorly I had to scrape off much of it and rewrite in hand so it looks terrible, as does my last-minute top edge border. I had planned to do so much more with the boats in the ocean, but they came out not so great and I ran out of time. I added Loran oils to the chocolate figures and they are okay, but there was no good way to curve them so they stick out from the cake. Just a mess. So I had to wonder, why can't I get the stencils to look right? The cake store guy says they do everything without fondant. It must be me, surely. I just have to try harder.
This is your captain speaking.
My dad is a former pilot. He's nearly blind now, so giving him a fancy cake he can't see didn't seem appropriate. However, he eats cookies every day for lunch, and I had lots of fondant that I hadn't used in my previous project. So I decided for Father's Day to create sugar cookies with fondant on top in the shapes of the various military and commercial airplanes he's flown over the years. He could then feel the outlines, and we could play a game of guess which plane this is. Before making these special cookies, I needed to learn how to make sugar cookies with royal icing frosting. So I made a small batch. Solely for experimentation and comparison purposes, I stenciled using my airbrush or more royal icing. By this point in time on my cake journey, for the first but not the last time, my dear husband commented,
Wouldn't they rather have the money?
"What?
Those kids you want to make birthday cakes for. Why not just give them the money you're spending on all this cake equipment?
You don't understand anything." Anyhow, I knew I'd be spending much of June taking care of my parents in Denver, so I decided to take nearly all of my cake decorating supplies with me and work on this project and the next one out there. That was 2 full suitcases worth. I learned that even when individually wrapped, liquid dyes do not travel well in airplane cargo holds. Carolyn advises using a Dresden tool to trace shapes from paper images onto fondant. However, I found it very difficult to see, so I wound up cutting the plain images out from the paper and then cutting the fondant from there. It took a long time. I also used edible markers to write on the fondant. I didn't want my mom eating all my dad's special cookies, so I also made a bunch of plain-shaped cookies using cookie cutters, frosted those in royal icing, and went to town with the airbrush and stencils.
Out of a sudden, you came through the door.
The special dad cookies turned out sort of okay. My fondant edges were pretty jagged. Also, I should have done a better job of straightening out the planes by using Carolyn's put the figure onto the picture drawing method. But I had already cut out the pictures. In the end, it didn't much matter, as my dad came down with an infection while I was there, so he was bedbound and too disoriented to play the Guess the Plane game. I thought I'd do something tortoise related for my brother-in-law's birthday. Started out with a simple idea to make 8 chocolate candy tortoises. But then I thought, the chocolates with filling are better, so I looked into fillings. Ooh, here's a soft caramel one, so I got some caramel. And here's some liqueur fillings, so I got some liqueurs. Ooh, rum cream. Well, you shouldn't be unprepared. But none of the molds online resembled Torte the tortoise. So instead I found a tortoise toy on Amazon that looks like her, and decided to create my own food-safe silicone mold. Weeks of watching mold-making videos ensued. First I used putty silicone, which didn't work so well. Then I switched to liquid silicone, which is more complex. So, creating stents to vent air bubbles using a wax melting pen, building proper casings involving glue guns and melting beeswax, and different approaches. Then, how to cut the molds so the chocolate can be released once cast, because the chocolate likes to break off in 3D molds of 4-legged creatures. Hundreds of hours, and many failed attempts. But while this was going on, I thought, well, why not make a cake too? My brother-in-law likes golf. I'll make a golf course cake. It will have multiple depths. Top one for the golf hole, lower ones for the rough grass, and even a lower one for the ground area. So I got a gigantic cake pan. And I'll put the chocolate tortoises all around with lettering on the tortoises, and a flag. But why stop there? I'll create a golf figure blowing on the ball, all made from chocolate and not fondant or Rice Krispie treats, because I'm one of the cool bakers now. So I needed to learn how to make modeling chocolate. And there will be a chocolate golf club and a golf bag nearby. And why not have a beautiful waterfall and river going through the golf course, spilling forth from a bridge, maybe a golf cart. No, that's too much. But I'll also make a miniature tortoise cake figure, larger than the chocolate tortoises, to be overlooking the golf hole. So I got an appropriate sized cake pan, and look, here are videos on how to make realistic tortoise cakes. This will be the best cake ever. Yeah, it wasn't. I had to devote most of my time in Denver to amateur nursing care for my dad instead of my overly ambitious amateur cake project. Thus, I managed to make only one successful filled chocolate tortoise, which I placed on this ghastly cake that looks like a toddler went amok. But since I used Carolyn's recipes for the cake and frosting, the relatives were a lot happier eating this cake than my Mother's Day cake. I was clearly still not yet ready to make cakes for birthday children, no matter how cakeless they might be. So, despite what the cake supply store guy says, I realized it's time to simplify, remember what I am doing this for, and follow the decorating advice of Carolyn. So I'm going to retry the decoration for my second project again, only this time I'll cover the cake in fondant.